Sorry about that last video there, that my microphone shut off and I didn't want to restart the whole thing. So this is the second part of it. We drew a line in the plot that we thought would fit the trend data. What is your prediction of the price of a 3,000 foot square house? We talked about that one. We were just about to write it down. About $500,000. What is the prediction of a 1,500 square foot home? Looking at the scatter plot, about $200,000. Consider the following. So this is where we're going to talk about what's the best way to draw a trend line. Consider the following general strategies students use for drawing a line. Do you think they represent a good strategy for drawing a line that will fit the data? Explain why or why not, or draw a line for the scatter plot using this strategy that would indicate why it is or why it is not a good strategy. So part A, the first person, Lori, thought she might draw her line using the very first point, the farthest to the left, and the very last point, the farthest to the right in the scatter plot, which seems like a decent idea. So it might work sometimes. But we need to be careful because the first point could be an outlier, which means it's not even near the rest of the data. So this one is not the best choice. Phil wants to be sure that he has the same number of points above and below the line, which is also not the best idea, because you could draw a horizontal line straight across. That would have half above and half below. And that would not show any trend either, positive or negative. So that's definitely not the best choice. Sandy thought she might try to get a line that had the most points right on it. So this might result in the most points on the line, but it possibly could be in the wrong direction by just the way they line up. So this isn't always the best. So Marie actually is the best method. She decided to get her line as close to as many of the points as possible. This is probably the best method. Now we're hoping some of the points fall on it, but if not, at least we know the general trend of it, which we could generalize. Based on the strategy discussed in exercise 5, would you change how you draw the line through the points? When I drew that line, I used this strategy. So my answer would be no. I used this strategy to draw my line. And if you recall the last video, I didn't care about being on a point. I put it right through the middle of typically where they were. Does the current in the water go faster or slower when the water is shallow? The data on the depth and speed of the Columbia River at various locations in Washington State listed below can help about the answer. So here's the depth in feet, that's x, and the velocity is y. So the velocity depends on how deep the water is. The deeper the water gets, you notice, the velocity decreases. So what can you tell about the relationship by looking at the numbers? More shallow it is, the faster the water. If you were to make a scatter plot of the data, which variable would you put on the horizontal axis and y? On the horizontal axis is the x. I would put the depth. because the velocity depends on the depth. So the velocity would have to be the y. So here's our scatter plot. Choose a data point. The scatter plot describe what it means. So any of these points you could pick. I'll pick this one right here because it's kind of there. At 2 feet deep. The Columbia River has a velocity of about 1.1 feet per second. And that's just looking at the graph and determining what the data shows. Based on the scatter plot, describe the relationship between velocity and depth. As depth increases, velocity decreases. How would you explain the relationship between the velocity and depth of the water? Well, the shallower the water, less volume, so there's not as much water. That means when it's moving faster. If the river is 2 feet deep at a certain spot, how fast do you think the current would be? Somewhere between 1.1 and 1.42 feet per second would be a good guideline using the scatter plot. So the next question asks, if you draw a line to represent the trend in the plot, will it make it easier to predict the velocity of the water if you know the depth? Why or why not? A line will definitely help you. A line will help to predict because there is a trend. So if there's no trend, no positive or no negative, then a line is not going to really help. Draw a line that you think does a reasonable job of modeling the trend in the scatter plot above. Use a line to predict when it's 8 feet deep. So we're going to go back and we're going to pick a line. I'm going to use my line tool. So that's generally about where, kind of right in the middle, and we're looking at 8 feet deep. Oh. And if we go up to 8 feet, man, this is just not working. 8 feet, and it crosses right here. So 0.75. So it's about 0.75 feet per second. Use a line to predict the velocity for a depth of 8.6 feet. How far off was the actual observed velocity for that location? 8.6 feet, so we're going to go back. I'll use a table. 8.6 feet right here is 0.59. So the actual is 0.59, and our trend line at 0.86 feet is right here. So 0.65, I would say, about what it is. So how far off was it? 0.06 feet per second variance. So it's pretty close. We're definitely going to use more of this line stuff with our scatter plots because it shows us a bunch of different stuff.